We've just seen the rarest of occurrences in the so-called debate on these nominees on the floor. We actually had an explanation of the nominee that we'd be voting on. The fact that the Senate's time is taken in a way that it never has been before to process the president's nominations is outrageous. It's just outrageous. I mean, there's some view that, well, we need more time to think about the nominee. There's plenty of time to do that. It's called the committee process. It's called a vetting process that also may very well take too long now. But there is plenty of time for these circuit court nominees that we're voting on this week to be vetted. There's plenty of time to ask them questions. There's plenty of time to look into their background. The only reason, in my view, that we take the time we're taking to do 6 votes, basically 6 votes on 6 judges in a week. That's 6 15-minute votes. If we were efficient enough to do that, that would be an hour and a half we'd take to vote on these 6 judges, and the final vote on none of them would be different than taking 5 days. So why do you take 5 days? You take 5 days because that means we can't get to anything else. Not only does it mean that the president's ability to populate the government, as people elected him to do, is diminished, but also it eliminates the time that we have to do the other work that the Senate is designed to do. The Senate is in, as the majority leader likes to describe it, the personnel business, but it's not supposed to be the only business of the Senate. I think we've been now over 90 of these cloture motions on the nominees that the president's made, 90. Now, what does that mean? In the previous 6 administrations, in the first 2 years of each of them, there was a total of 24 cloture motions. 24 times in 6 presidencies in 2 years did we do what we're doing right now. 24 times, 6 presidencies, 2 in the first 2 years, an average of 4 times. We're going to certainly be to 104 times well before the end of 2 years, but an average of 4 times was the floor abused in this way. An average of 4 times was there a reason to have a debate. And I haven't looked back at those debates. I guess I should. Wouldn't it be shocking, Mr. President, if those debates were actual debates? Wouldn't it be stunning if all 4 of those 4 times in each of those 6 presidencies, when the cloture motion was required and using the maximum time available was insisted on, or at least a substantial portion of the maximum time available was insisted on, wouldn't it be something if we looked back and found out that there really was a reason to debate those nominees? And there might have been. There might have been. There might have been someone who was rejected, as John Tower was, to be Secretary of Defense. If you're going to reject one of your colleagues in the Senate, that was probably a pretty debatable moment. Maybe very well have justified 20 hours or 30 hours, the maximum that could be insisted on, that is initially insisted on now on everybody. And many of them some of them take that, many of them take a portion of that. But what really is lost is the other work that could happen in the course of the week. That's why in 2013 and 14, when Democrats were in control of the Senate, a bipartisan group of senators got together and said, let's eliminate a lot of these confirmations that we really isn't worthy of Senate time. Let's take people that when there were only 1 or 2 of them in the whole government in 1882 might have been worthy of a Senate debate and Senate vote, but let's take them off the list now that there are 210 of them to be confirmed. Let's take them off the list. Of course, neither of those numbers are numbers from the debate, but that's what we did. And then let's put a whole other group on the list that if no one demands a vote, they can be confirmed if the committee recommends they should be confirmed without a vote. And we tried to eliminate the process so you could really focus in on that rare occasion when there really should be a debate on the Senate floor about these nominees. people should look at the end of this week, and I will look, and just see how many minutes we're actually taking talking about these 6 nominees. Now, it doesn't mean, Mr. President, that the 6 nominees shouldn't be talked about. It doesn't mean that when you're going to put somebody on a court of appeals for life, that the Congress shouldn't have looked carefully at them, but that's already happened. That's already happened, and it happened in some cases months ago, in other cases weeks ago. That's already happened. This is just a matter of whether we're going to vote or not. There will be no votes will be persuaded by running the clock. No votes will be changed by running the clock. And the power to, of course, put people on a federal bench for life is an important power given in the Constitution to the President for the Supreme Court and such other courts as the Congress may determine the country needs. It's not a thing to be taken lightly, but it's also not a thing to be abused. It's not a process where the protection that you might use 4 times in 2 years is suddenly used 90 times in 15 months. Something is wrong when that has happened to the process, and at the end of the day, the Senate is a place where the minority deserves to be heard. The Senate is a place where the rights of the minority, it makes it a unique legislative body, just like electing only a third of the Senate every 2 years makes it a unique legislative body. It takes a long time to change the entire Senate, and it has always been one of the purposes of the Senate to be sure that the minority had a chance to be heard, and the minority is always able to hold on to those rights until the minority decides we're going to abuse the right. When a right becomes an entitlement, oh, it says we could have up to 30 hours of debate, so we're going to insist on it every single time. That's when that right is in jeopardy. That's when you run the risk of losing that right. I just encourage my colleagues, let's get to work. Let's stop hearing we don't have time on the floor to get our job done, where every time you turn on C-SPAN, more often than not, you see the Senate in what's called quorum call, which is a very slow calling of the rolls of the Senate because there's nobody here to say anything, because we're using up someone's insisted on 30 hours of debate. Let's get to the business of the country. Let's do what we are. This is the greatest country in the history of the world, with the greatest capacity to impact the world of any country in the world. When you turn on C-SPAN and look at what's happening in the United States Senate, it shouldn't be a blank screen because we're waiting X number of hours for people to cast a vote that they already know what that vote is going to be. And so let's take the time we need to debate the nominations we need to debate, but let's quit wasting the time using the excuse of, well, we need to have thoughtful consideration of this nomination that, by the way, no one is going to come to the floor and talk about. If we have Senator Johnson may have set a new standard here. Certainly, when I checked this a few days ago, we'd had a debate on a very controversial nominee, and this was to NASA. This was the NASA director. I think it passed by 1 vote. Pretty controversial. We spent hours and hours for an open debate on the floor, and there was 17 minutes of debate on the floor. 17 minutes and something exceeding 17 hours. No wonder people are frustrated in the way they'd like to see their government work and the way their government should work, and the excuses we come up with to keep the government from doing what it ought to do in a way that people should openly see it and be proud of it. I look forward, Mr. President, to the quorum call no longer being the daily flag of the United States Senate, and maybe appropriately, seeing no one here, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.